I think I need to take a class on how to title your sermon. So we have a phrase, right? The one who dies with the most toys wins. The one who dies with the most toys wins. And that's what I was going for. The reality is that's not true. The one who dies with the most toys and the one who dies with the least toys or no toys at all, they die. Exactly. We all die, and someone else gets the toys. Now, if you didn't know that, you need to read the book of Ecclesiastes, okay? Or go spend some time talking to the residents of a cemetery. I would recommend reading the book of Ecclesiastes. But we're going to all die, and we need to prepare for it, right? And that's where I was headed. Unbelievably, though, today, I realized Christmas is coming this weekend. And this almost sounds like a threat. So I'm not threatening you. I love giving gifts. This weekend is going to be great. And come Sunday evening, we'll talk more about the importance of giving gifts. That's all good. I'm not opposed to gifts at all. But I am more in favor of preparing for our own future. And gifts are great, but there are more important things. So I have a goal tonight. It's a very simple goal. We are wrapping up our series in the book of Proverbs. We've been in Proverbs since August. And my goal tonight is simply this. I'd like to make two closing arguments, and they are this. There's a right way to live, and there's a right way to die. Okay? So, Zach, if you don't have the remote, it's okay. If you just want to click it back there. Do you have my notes so you can follow along? Thank you. All right, we'll just do it that way. There's a right way to live, and there's a right way to die. All right, now, the first point here, there's a right way to live. That is what we've been saying since August. That's the message of the book of Proverbs, how to live wisely. And so we've been walking through that week by week in the different topics that Proverbs talks about. So let's spend a little bit of time reviewing what we've said. If you will, turn to Proverbs 1:1. Let's start with Proverbs 1:1 and remind ourselves. This is where we began months ago. It says this, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel, to understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. And now zero in here, verse 7, Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so what we have is we have a contrast here. There's a call. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So to live well, to live wisely, begins with fearing the Lord. And if you remember, we spent time wrestling with what does that mean to fear the Lord. In a simple way of reminding ourselves, fearing the Lord is living in the light of His presence. It's living with an awareness that God is real and God's going to hold me to an account for the way that I live. And so the two words that stick in my mind when I think of that phrase, the fear of the Lord, the two words are awe and respect. I live with a growing awe of who God is and a growing sense of respect for His holiness, for His boundaries, for His wisdom that He gives us. All right, so fear the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But then in the contrast, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. That means if I'm going to be wise, I should not despise wisdom. I should not despise instruction. I should receive instruction. So hang on to these two things because we're going to circle back to these at the very end. How well am I fearing the Lord? Am I growing in my fear of the Lord right now? And how well do I receive instruction? Am I growing in my desire to receive godly instruction? Now, the opposite of it, though, verse 7, is despising instruction. It's rejecting wisdom. And this happens several ways in our lives. One way is there's a number of ways we show pride. See, this is humility. Fearing the Lord, receiving instruction. That takes humility. And if I'm prideful, I will say things, maybe not even out loud, but in my mind, I'll be thinking things like, I know that God's standard is this, but it's okay, and I start to make exceptions for myself. What I'm doing when I start to say, I don't need to follow God's standard, is I'm exhibiting pride. I'm saying, I know better than God, and I have a better way. I don't need his moral restraint. I don't need his censure in my life. I'll be just fine over here. Thank you very much. And that's prideful. Another way that we can show pride is when we start mocking other people. If we're ridiculing other people or if we're putting other people down, we're thinking of ourselves higher than we ought, and we're thinking less of somebody that God has created. Another way that we can show pride is when we're simple. And Proverbs talks about these three over and over. But that third area is when I think things like, I just don't need to worry about the consequences. This isn't that big of a deal. If I stop thinking about the consequences of my choices, if I stop thinking about the ramifications of my behavior, and I choose a simple mindset, I'm in trouble. The choices that we make matter. There is a way to live wisely. And that's what Solomon is doing in the book of Proverbs, is telling us there is a way to live. There is a way to live in wisdom. There is a way to live rightly. All right? And if we develop that thought a little bit further, there is a right way to live. A way that we can express it is to say this: our choices, my choices, your choices, impact the quality of our lives. The choices that you made already today impacted the quality of your life today. And we've heard the expressions, there's lots of ways of saying it. One of them is, you're making the bed today that you will lay in tomorrow. And it's true. In so many areas of our lives, the choices that we made this morning before 8 o'clock, they impacted the rest of our day today. You may say, nah, dodge that one, Pastor Dave. I wasn't up before 8. You impacted the rest of your day. I promise. The choices that we make impact the rest of our lives. So let me prove it to you. Look over at, let's spend some time just kind of walking through these early chapters of Proverbs. Look at Proverbs chapter 3 with me, if you will. Proverbs chapter 3. Verse 1 says this: My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. And then he says this in verse 2: For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. What Solomon is saying right there is this: if you choose to live wisely, if you choose to order your life around God's instructions in the book of Proverbs, it will add days to your life and it will add peace to your life. The choices that we make impact the quality of our lives. Proverbs teaches this. Look at chapter 4. Let's start with verse 4. He also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words. This is wisdom speaking. Let your heart retain my words. Keep my commands and live. So this is how to live well. Keep God's commands. And he says this: get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. If you want to give a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old the best gift you can give them, plead with them to spend time in the book of Proverbs. Highlight that verse. Get wisdom. This is what our children need. They need the Proverbs. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Look at verse 13. Take firm hold of instruction. Do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. Wisdom impacts the quality of our lives, the choices that we make. Look at verse 20. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my saying. So there again is that idea of receiving instructions, leaning in. Proverbs 4:21. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to all their flesh. I did a search in the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs uses the word life. In English, life. There's a couple of Hebrew words that translate into life 40 times. The word life is used 40 times in the book of Proverbs. This is not an isolated topic. Solomon is saying over and over again, this is how you live a wise life. Here's how to live rightly. Pursue God's commands. And look at verse 23. We've used this verse before, but I love this verse. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. So we need to guard our hearts. And I'm going to ask a few questions in a few moments. And in those questions, I'm going to ask about our behavior, but our behavior is always evidence of what is going on in our hearts. Always. The words that come out of our mouths, they're a reflection of our hearts. The things that we do, they reveal where our hearts are at. And Solomon is saying, guard your heart with all diligence. Protect your heart. Stay here in Proverbs 4, because we're going to look at verse 24 in just a second. But let me skip ahead and just share something else that Solomon says in chapter 8. Chapter 8, verse 35 and 36, he says this. Again, speaking about wisdom. For whoever finds me, finds wisdom, finds life, and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who sins against me, against wisdom, wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death. All those who hate wisdom love death. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to prove Solomon is painting this portrait. If you love life, if you want to live well, we've got to pursue wisdom. If we want to reject wisdom, what we're actually saying is, I'd rather die. I love death. I'm going to go my own way. That's what he's saying. Now look how practical he gets in verse 4 of chapter 24. Chapter 4, verse 24. He says this, put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. So now he's getting concrete. Here's how to live rightly. Put away a deceitful mouth. He says, let your eyes look straight ahead and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Remove your foot from evil. He's saying, I'm instructing you in the right way to live, so walk in that way. Keep your focus on the narrow way. It's very interesting. When I got sick last week and the sinus pressure was so bad, I couldn't see well. So I was trying to read, I couldn't read. And so I switched to audiobooks and dove back into the Pilgrim's Progress. Man, that is a gold mine if you have not read the Pilgrim's Progress recently. But you know what? What's over and over again, I think I'm in part 8. Narrow way. The narrow way. The narrow way. Keep your eyes fixed on the narrow way. We know the narrow way. But sometimes we allow our eyes and then our heart and our feet follow. We wander. So, let me ask a question. He says here in verse 24, put away from you a deceitful mouth. So let's consider this. He says to avoid deceit. So let's consider this application and go with me for a moment, because we've talked about this a lot in our series. Pastor Greg preached a very challenging message on gossip. We also talked about just proper speech, but let's start with gossip. Pastor Greg defined it: sharing something negative about someone with someone who is not part of the solution or the problem. It's being unbiblical. It's talking about somebody who's not present, being negative about them to somebody else who's not part of the solution and they're not part of the problem. It's bringing in a third party. That's gossip. And the question is, don't answer out loud, but in your own heart, Solomon is warning us, if we want to live rightly, We have to put away perverse lips. How have we been doing with our speech, church? Have we been avoiding gossip? Just in the last week, the last 2 weeks, have you kept a tight rein on your tongue? The converse of that is then talking about what is the kind of speech that the Proverbs commend. And that sermon was, we called it apples of gold in settings of silver, if you remember that. And here's some of the characteristics that we talked about. So if we say, yes, Pastor Dave, I've been working hard, I'm not gossiping, I'm cutting that out of my life. Okay, so then the opposite is, has our speech been beautiful? Has it been appropriate? Has it been valuable? Now this matters thinking about this weekend. It's very likely you're going to have conversations with loved ones this weekend. Think about the conversations that you have in your living room, around a dining room table, or over a phone. Is your speech timely? Saying the right things at the right time? Is it honest? Will it be honest? Will it be limited? Right? Let your words be few. It's in the Proverbs, it's in the Psalms. I read it in Psalms today. Are our words healing? Are our words sweet? Are our words joy-filled? What a beautiful picture Solomon gives us throughout the book of Proverbs of ways that our speech can be apples of gold in settings of silver. Does that describe us? But let me ask about some other areas, not just speech, because Proverbs has been addressing all areas of our lives. So let me ask us, in reflecting back on this series and the topics that we've covered, how would you answer these questions in your own heart? If I were to ask you, is God pleased with your friendships? When we talked about friendships, we talked about being a good friend, according to Proverbs, is someone who's loyal. A good friend is someone who sharpens someone else, points them to God's word. A good friend is also someone who's patient. So how are your friendships? Is God pleased with your friendships? I'm not asking if you have 4,000 friends on Facebook. I'm asking the friends that God has given you, how are we doing? Is God pleased with your work ethic, your work effort? We talked about that a few weeks ago. Whether that's serving, whether that's still for gainful employment. I'm not asking if you're pleased with your work effort. I'm asking if God is. Is God smiling on how you approach the work that He's given you, the serving that He's given you? How about finances? Again, this is a tough time to ask this, right? I don't know what your credit card looks like or your bank account looks like right now if you've just been trying to love your kids or your grandkids with gifts, right? And that can be a wonderful, lovely, good, God-pleasing way to spend money, is to be loving others and serving others. And that's the question. Is God pleased with your finances? Right? He's the one that matters. His opinion is the one that matters. So how would you answer that? And if you don't know, ask Him. I'm serious. Lay out your budget on your dining room table and say, God, this is all yours. Are you pleased? Are you honored? How about humility? That was a tough one. Humility versus pride. Is God pleased with my view of myself in His image, who He's created me to be, seeking to serve Him? See, pride can creep up in so many ways, and that's what we looked at that week. Pride can creep up in ways like needing to make sure the other person knows that I'm right. That's pride. Pride can creep up in ways of not being willing to let go of a hurt, of a wrong. What a beautiful time of year to let go of a hurt, to forgive somebody. And be humble. Even if you are right, it's okay. God knows it. And so you don't need to worry about it, right? We've been reminding ourselves through the book of Proverbs that God has given us a blueprint for life, but it comes down to the daily decisions that we make, the little moments. And so the question that I'm asking us tonight to consider is this. Is there an area of our life that God is telling us, I want you to give me more of this? And I forgot one, Zach, didn't I? We talked about sexual purity. It was a very challenging week when we looked at the stats on pornography and its use in America right now. It's disgusting. It was a very difficult week. But it's a question that we all need to keep asking, all of us, because we live in an absolutely sex-saturated culture. Are we guarding our own hearts? Are we guarding our eyes? Are we guarding our minds? Are we guarding our emotions? Are we protecting our testimony in our family, in our community? How are we doing with our sexual purity? Is God pleased with our purity? So, all of this is the first argument. There is a right way to live. And the choices that we make each day impact the quality of our lives, right? So, that leads us to the second point then is there's also a right way to die. There's a right way to die. So, turn to Proverbs chapter 11, if you will. Proverbs chapter 11. We looked at this 2 weeks ago, a couple of these verses. So let's go back there. Proverbs chapter 11. Let me read verses 3 to 6. Proverbs 11, 3 to 6. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath. Okay, that's another way of saying toys don't matter at the day of judgment. When we stand before God, it doesn't matter if you had the most toys or if you had no toys at all. Okay? Riches do not profit in the day of wrath. But, and this is, the title of the whole series was Little Sayings, Big Truth. This is a little saying and a huge truth. Righteousness delivers from death. Hang on to that. That is a crucial statement. Righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. So in verses 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, Solomon is going back and forth and he's making two arguments and he's repeating himself to reinforce those arguments, right? So the first argument he's making, or that we'll focus on, verse 3 and verse 5, this is very similar to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. He's saying, if you live a righteous life, if you live in a blameless way, then your path will be straight. And that's the point that we've been making all night. There is a right way to live. It's okay. So, there is a right way to live. And we know that we can't be blameless on our own. But as we seek to obey God, and He is producing righteousness in us, it will guide us. That's verse 3. The integrity of the upright will guide them. Right? Verse 5. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright. Here's how I experience this at times in my own life. I seek to be faithful in my time with God each morning. And there are times in the morning when I'm reading God's Word, I will come across a verse, and for whatever reason, I know I need that verse for the day that's in front of me. That I need that truth. I need to obey that truth. I cannot forget that truth. I'll jot it down in a journal. This is going to matter today, and I'm already praying about it. There are other times when I read a verse and it just sheds light on a situation that I'm praying for with a friend. There's times that friends will ask for counsel and I'm praying for them and I'm seeking God's face. And there's times I'll read it and I'll go, hey, that's what we're praying about. Right? And what's happening there is God, through His Word, He's shaping my mind and He's shaping my heart according to His way. And then that then impacts how I speak with that friend, and that impacts how I approach the day. What a difference if I ignore that, and instead, what do? I turn on the TV. Or I go to the radio for my morning devotions. Right? And then whatever voice that's out there, that begins shaping my mind and heart. Does that make sense? I don't want that voice or those voices shaping. I want to hear from God. And I want that for you too. So it doesn't, and I'm not saying you have to do your devotions in the morning. God can do the same thing at noon. He can do the same thing in the evening. But the question is, are we seeking His face? And in His Word, He speaks to us, and He shapes our minds, and He shapes our hearts. He transforms us. He molds us through His Word. But we have to spend time with Him, right? We have to spend time in His Word. Now, we get to the second part. So the first part is we've got to spend time with God, and He will make our path straight. He will guide us. But then the other part, righteousness delivers from death. That's verse 4. Verse 6, the righteousness of the upright will deliver them. Proverbs 14:24 says this, the wicked is banished in his wickedness, but the righteous has a refuge in his death. The righteous has a refuge in his death. So the point I'm making here is this. Verse 4 of chapter 11, verse 6 of chapter 11, chapter 14, verse 32, all of those are saying these. Not only do the daily choices that we make impact our lives as we're living them now, the choices that we make in this life, they impact our eternity. The choices that we make now impact our future. Why? He says, righteousness delivers from death. How can someone be found righteous at death? There's no toys. No one shows up at that moment carrying all the Bibles they've ever highlighted. I love highlighting Bibles. None of these Bibles are going to heaven with me. No one shows up to heaven with their Sunday school attendance. How are we declared righteous in that moment? How was someone found righteous? Now, we answered this 2 weeks ago, didn't we? We spent a whole sermon on the idea of righteousness, which is all through the book of Proverbs, right? The answer is this: none of us can do anything to be declared righteous at the moment of death. Well, we can't. Because all of us sin, and because all of us sin, we are sin-stained, and so we're guilty, and in that guilt, we can't do enough to wash ourselves clean. We just can't do it. It's impossible. And we all know it. We know that even as humans, we can't measure up. A lot of us try, but we can't. So how then do we become righteous? Well, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, and it's that God is willing to declare us righteous. When is God, or how, or why is God willing to declare us righteous? God is willing to declare us righteous if we will place our faith and trust in Him alone for salvation. And it's that simple. We're going to hear it Sunday again as well. We heard it a couple weeks ago. We hear it often here at Faith. God declares someone righteous when they place all of their faith, their whole heart, all their trust, their life in God's hands. We know these verses. Just love these. Enjoy these with me. Romans chapter 10, verses 9 to 13. I love these verses. Some of my favorite verses in all of Scripture. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. As Scripture says, anyone who believes in Him will never be put to shame. I love that. Anyone who believes in Him will never be put to shame. Romans 10:13 says, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So, we asked this question 2 weeks ago, and I have to ask again tonight. Have you been declared righteous? It's the most important question. Because you may be doing your very level best to live a great life, and even a lot of things may be going well in this life. None of it matters if you reach the moment of death and you have not been declared righteous by God. All of this stuff ends up not mattering. The one with the most toys dies. And that's the moment when it all matters. Have you been declared righteous? And how can you be declared righteous? You place your faith in Jesus Christ as Savior. That's all it is. Oh, it's amazing. So, let's go back and let's close this with Proverbs chapter 1, okay? Because Solomon warns us as to how important this is. Proverbs chapter 1, I want to start at verse 28. Proverbs 1:28, and he's talking about wisdom. It applies to how we live this life, but it also applies to how we're approaching God and getting ready for death. Proverbs 1:28, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. Now, I'm telling you, there's some very good Proverbs studies out there. And early in my 20s, a study that I was doing came across this paragraph, 28 to 33, and it just lit me up. That verse says, there is a time. And this whole section before it, it's been saying wisdom is calling out in the streets. Wisdom is making itself available, and wisdom is available. This verse is saying a time will come when someone will say, oh yeah, maybe I should get wisdom, and it's too late. It's too late. The decisions that we make each day, they matter. There is a time. Sunday morning, we're going to be in Isaiah 55. Isaiah 55, verses 6 and 7. You need to read those before Sunday morning. Call on me. Seek me while I may be found. Jesus is near. Then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would have none of my counsel and despised my every rebuke. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way and be filled to the full with their own fancies. That is Romans chapter 1 right there. Verse 32, for the turning away of the simple will slay them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. The first time I read it in NIV. And it says, the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. There was a song on the radio at that time called Waterfalls. It's exactly this verse. It says, don't go chasing waterfalls. It will kill you. The song is about someone chasing the fantasies that they had in life, and it destroyed their body, destroyed their life, and it's true. It's what happens. The waywardness of the simple will kill them. It leads to death. But whoever listens to me will dwell safely and will be secure without fear of evil. And so the argument I've been making tonight is this. There's a way to live. Our choices impact the quality of our lives. And there's a right way to die. There's a right way to live and a right way to die. Only righteousness delivers from ultimate death. So let me ask us some closing reflection questions. Are you ready to die well? I hope so. I hope so. We just met as some prayer leaders, and I mentioned we get to the end of the year and I like to reflect. I go back through my calendar and I look at what has happened over the course of the year. And if any of you do that, you probably have funerals marked on your calendar. I do. There are folks that are in heaven now that I did not think would be in heaven when we started this year. I don't know what next year holds. It's likely there's going to be funerals next year that I'm not expecting and that we're not expecting right now. Are you ready? Have you been declared righteous? It's the most important question that you can answer. Are you living in safety without any dread of disaster? And then my second question is this. Are you living well? And I want to go back to that first Proverbs 1:7 and just ask this closing question of our whole series. Are you living with a fear of the Lord? And what I mean by that is this. Are you growing? So wrestle with this for a moment. Are you growing in your awe and in your your awe and in your respect of God? And here's how I'd like you to think about answering this. If you're going to have a coffee with somebody, or an ice cream, or a hot chocolate, whatever, and you have a friend that sits across the table from you, and they ask you that question, are you growing in your awe and respect of God? And you say, yes, I am. Now prove it. What's the evidence in your life? What can you write down on a napkin to demonstrate to your friend, God's growing me. Here's how I'm growing in my awe. Here's how I'm growing in my respect for God right now. How would you answer that question? The second question is, are you growing in receiving instruction? And I'd ask the same thing. If your friend ask you that question and then said, prove it. Tell me, I want to know how you're growing in receiving instruction. What would you write down on that napkin? What are the evidences in your life that your heart is hungry to be fed by God, by His Word, by His instruction? Are you growing in receiving God's instruction? That's a heart of humility, isn't it? It's a beautiful thing. Let me pray for us. Father, I'm looking out at so many faces that I see their growth and I see the work that you are doing. And I lift each of us up and we acknowledge that you call us to choose wisely, to daily choose wisely. But Father, in those daily choices, we also recognize that we cannot change ourselves spiritually, that we're absolutely dependent on you. And so I ask that you grow in us. You make that promise, Philippians 1:6, that the work that you've begun in us, you will carry it on to completion. And so I'm asking for each of us that the year 2024 is a year that we do keep growing in how we receive instruction from you. We keep growing in our awe of you, our worship of you, our respect for you. That our understanding, our sense of you continues to grow, and it leads to greater and greater obedience, greater praise. Father, please do the work that only you can do in us individually, but Father, please do the work that only you can do in our church. Purify Faith Baptist Church. Help us to be becoming a church that worships you in greater ways, in purer ways, in louder ways. Father, use us for your glory, that people will come to know you, people will grow in their walks with you, because you're using this church for your glory on the corner of Crystal Beach and Winter Lake Road. Father, thank you for what you have done. Thank you for what you are doing. Thank you for the offer of the forgiveness of sins, the opportunity to be declared righteous. And Father, I thank you personally for the safety and the security that you've given me, the wonderful forgiveness of sins. Father, thank you. I thank you for each of my brothers and sisters that have experienced that as well. It's in your precious Son's name we come to you. Amen.